Feldman. We'll see how fast we can get Jacob in, but also joining Isaiah Kacyvenski, former NFL player, went to Harvard, co-founder of Will Ventures, and my friend Rudy Cline-Thomas. There's his picture. If you're a pro athlete, particularly a basketball player, and you have designs on connections in Silicon Valley, you might want to ring up Rudy and see if he can help. He has worked with Andre Iguodala. I love the business we cover where, Rudy, there you are, where you're like in the front, you're bigger than Steph Curry, you're bigger than Andre. It's sort of
big. My head's bigger than all theirs. That's what it is, Scott.
Well, yeah, it's like the opposite of the painting behind you now, where you are the big head in the group. But I think where we're heading in with A-Rod coming up next is sort of the ability to really scale. It's great to have your contract, and yes, like we talked about it, it's multi-generational wealth. But there's a different level. And I get the sense that in the old days, it was rock stars want to be athletes, athletes want to be rock stars. Well, now athletes want to be tech entrepreneurs. They want to rule the world. And it's one of the reasons Andre went to Golden State. It was to work with Joe Lacob at Kleiner Perkins. And Isaiah, you are looking at technology and sports to see what works in that ecosystem. But you're a huge believer of it as a testing ground, and that its ability to then scale to other parts of life. So, Jacob, I set it up with that. You take it away, my friend.
Perfect. It's all downhill from that intro. Thanks so much, Scott. Thanks to you guys, Rudy and Isaiah, for joining us. I think that's two strong entrants for the best backdrop of the day from both of you guys. So I appreciate the setups you got going on. I think just to kind of follow up on those intros real quick, and Rudy, we'll start with you, founder, managing partner of Mastry Inc. You identify investment opportunities for professional athletes and others as well. And I could list off the companies you've invested in over these last few years: Allbirds, Chop Salad. I think we've probably got some fans of them in the audience. Casper Mattresses, probably some folks who sleep on that tonight. The one that jumped out to me was a couple of years ago, you and Andre Iguodala identified Zoom as an opportunity. So I got to start there. And I'm curious what you saw coming when you made that investment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Obviously, that gets a lot of attention nowadays. I met Eric Yuan at a conference about 6 years ago, and luckily enough, one of my mentors is a guy named Paul Kwan, who heads tech banking at Morgan Stanley, and he took me aside and he said to me, in the next couple of years, I know everyone approaches you with consumer opportunities and startup opportunities. But you really need to focus on enterprise software. That's the future. That's where everything's going. I know it seems foreign to you, but let's take some time and understand it. And I listened to him. Again, this was 6 years ago. I met Ryan Smith, who and invested his company, who's now the CEO, and he's the owner of the Utah Jazz. But again, my world was opened up to enterprise software about six years ago. And that's primarily where we've made most of our investments since then. And I met Eric Yuan a year after that, and I'd heard about Zoom. It was a pretty hot company at the time as well too. He was actually already making money, and he had a passion again, for basketball and what we were doing. And we hit it off. I remember, I think we spent a lot of time together. He was pretty adamant on us investing in this company, and once I took a look under the hood, I loved what he was building. Obviously, it's not what it was today, and there's obviously a lot of luck in it as well too. I can't say that who the hell knew that the Zoom would be what it is today, that long ago. But I loved him as an individual. Loved his mission, most importantly, and obviously he had found a segment in the market to take advantage of, given his past experience as well too. So had that conviction, and again, never who knew at the time.
Totally. So yeah, we have the Q&A function here. So feel free to take your shot. Ask Rudy what the next big thing is. We'll see what we can get out of him at the end of this. But
hold me to it.
As we've been learning all afternoon here, athletes increasingly recognizing themselves as personal brands and more so as personal businesses, and that's really shaken up every element of this industry. You don't have to be an athlete or a VC investor to feel that influence on whatever kind of business you're doing. And here in the other corner here, we've got Isaiah Kacyvenski, who is one of those people who has been shaking things up, and an incredible story. Went from periodically homeless as a child to Harvard to the NFL, where he played for 7 years, to Oprah's couch, featured on Oprah's TV show, and now here on Sportico Live. So I feel like you can probably say you've made it at this point. No?
I feel like the best is yet to come, and I appreciate the very kind intro for both Scott and yourself, and it's great to be on here. But yeah, I sometimes look back and fully appreciate all the people that have helped me to where I'm at now, and have just loved me along the way and loved me enough to help out as much as I have when I've reached out for help. Along the way as well, from mentors to everybody else. So I would say, yes, I've made it, but I feel like I've touched the tip of the iceberg right now, where the best is just yet to come, like I said.
Absolutely. And one of the many things I left off in that Cliff Notes version is, you're now the founder and managing partner of VC fund Will Ventures. And so talking about your arc, let's dive in there a little bit. As we've seen this shift in athlete investing over these last 2 decades, you've really embodied that from joining the NFL in 2000 to 20 years later being here. How did you go from linebacker to deal maker?
I'll give you the condensed version of how that came about. But my backup plan in college was to be a doctor if I didn't play in the NFL. So I was a pre-med undergrad. I was everything nipped and tucked as I went through. And, I ended up, being lucky enough to be drafted by the Seahawks, played 8 years. But when I got my signing bonus, my day one, I got a $275,000 signing bonus. And my father made $8,000 a year when I graduated high school as a janitor. And I got that, and I didn't have any finance background, no economic background. If anybody's read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that was exactly the situation. I had zero exposure. And so I was handed that check. And at the same exact moment, I realized, holy cow, I just don't want to just hand this to someone else. I actually want to learn from the ground up what to do with this and be smarter on it. So I spent the next 3 years from 2000 to 2003 learning everything I could about public and private markets, learning that process, peppering everybody I could, reading as many books as I could. And then in 2003, started investing in private companies, angel investing. And then I would spend my off seasons embedded into those companies, and just learned a ton along the way. So that's 17 years ago, right? Learned a ton along the way, right? And I was a lone wolf doing that, reaching out to as many people as I could. And very early, I saw sometimes athletes were seeing some of the shittiest deal flow you can see, and the rest of the deals were kind of left to everyone else. So I made it my point. I wanted to find as many good deals as I possibly could. So I just had to talk to more and more and more people around that. And that was one of the things, as I went from that moment in 2003 to embedding myself and learning how, like a fly on the wall, how to take a concept, bring it to commercialization, all that, very, very tough process of being an entrepreneur, the heavy lifting, learning that process along the way. And from that, accelerating, the story. By the time I retired in 2008, I didn't want to go to business school. I didn't want to go to medical school. I wanted to go to business school, and I needed a formal base of knowledge to transition to Harvard Business School. And then knew I eventually wanted to start a venture capital fund. I just knew I needed to earn the right to a point of view and really set out a path to do that. Had some great mentorship along the way from Rick Frisbee. He's one of the founders of Battery Ventures, big name in the space. And he gave me a great piece of advice, which is I always thought I should have been an associate. If I want to be in venture capital, I'd be an associate at a big fund and kind of work my way up and then go start my own fund. And he gave me a great piece of advice early on, which is saying, if you want to be an investor, a venture investor, put yourself in those shoes. There's too many people in the space that have actually never been entrepreneurs themselves. Go put yourself in those shoes. Be an entrepreneur. Know what it's like to take that concept, bring all the commercialization, all those different aspects for that. So when you're on the other side, you fully understand what it feels like. It was the best piece of advice I had gotten. Joined an amazing company called MC10, which was recently acquired by Dassault Systems, a large French conglomerate. It was an amazing experience around that from being an entrepreneur to then crafting this vision. What is Will Ventures, which is how does sports, which has always been kind of this perceived niche market, narrowly defined, how does it touch massive adjacent markets? Map that to pain points in companies and areas and market segments that the largest companies in the world, the biggest funds in the world care about as well, but map it in a way that's methodical and rigorous around that. So that's what we did, kind of this perceived niche market, mapped it, co-founded a sports innovation lab with Angela, who was on the last talk track. It was an amazing process to map the world of research and then go invest against that as we move on. So that's kind of where we're at, early seed stage, and kind of where we're at. There's been a ton of learning along the way, like I said, but that's kind of the Cliff Notes version. It's been just an amazing experience along the way.
Yeah, and when you hear that, Rudy, and you've seen this too, but when you hear how much work goes into this for him, for you, this isn't for every athlete, right? This path. I'm curious, kind of, who this is for, and how small the world of athletes that should be thinking about this is in your mind.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of transactions nowadays, and there's a lot of vanity to it as well too. We see a lot of headlines, but I think that there's only a certain number of athletes that are willing to spend enough time to understand exactly what the essence of being a venture capitalist is. And, there's guys that have done it for the last 20, 30 years, right? And for an athlete to come along the way and to be a venture capitalist just because they can write a check, again, that's not very much the approach, right? I think that the biggest thing that I've tried to focus on is the education piece, right? So if you don't make an investment, there's just so much to learn. I think it's really, really important to learn. And I've realized that, again, just being an athlete and having a focus on a specific discipline for such a long time, I see that it's really keen that a lot of guys are really open to learning something new, and there's a propensity to learn something new from so many of them. So again, I really try to focus on the education and first and foremost, and not the transaction. And I think that takes a lot of time. And I'm not sure there's that many of them that are willing to take the amount of time that it takes to actually to do it well, So yeah. Again, and if that's not the case, then it's, again, making sure that you can identify the people that can do it well and or are doing it well. So it's not a bad situation.
Yeah, I just want to chime in there. I love that idea of just feeding this level of curiosity. It's very self-selecting, as Rudy talked about, which is, I talk to athletes all the time across the board. And those ones that want to learn, I think it's really providing this umbrella and halo of go out, go learn from the best, see what people have existed in the space for 20, 30 years, devoted their life to that, and are at the top of their game on another side, whether it's investor or being an entrepreneur as well. Learn from that, and then take that away to start to develop your own point of view around markets, spaces, identifying talented entrepreneurs, everything else as well. So I love that, kind of starting with the education aspect.
And along those lines, how are you guys seeing companies viewing either active athletes or retired athletes? You mentioned this, Isaiah, that I think for a long time they probably were seen as marks or someone you could kind of get a very favorable deal with. How has that respect come along for you, Rudy, with the athletes you're working with, or for you as a former athlete yourself?
Go ahead.
I appreciate it, Isaiah. I think for me, the stuff that I'm focused on now, there's not too many companies that are I think he's speaking to any athletes or obviously seeking them as investors. I think everybody's obviously interested. It's interesting when you get that call. A CEO gets a call from a prospective athlete to possibly invest, but I'm more interested in the non-sexy stuff as well too. So again, I haven't made too many consumer bets. And again, the consumer companies are swirling around the athletes for the most part. But again, that's where I've focused my attention on, and I don't see myself focusing my attention on that for some time now. So again, the guys that I put my arms around that want to learn, unfortunately, it's the non-sexy stuff, and it gets really into the meat and potatoes of diligence, as it attributes to fintech, enterprise software, and marketplaces.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think it ties back to kind of education. I think once you start to, as an athlete, once you start to open up this world that existed of tech, kind of broadly defined, and the opportunities that exist, you start to learn kind of what Rudy just said, which is it comes in all shapes and sizes, not things that you can just necessarily easily understand as a consumer, but saying, all right, how do a lot of different businesses create value? And what types of markets do they touch as well? So the more people you talk to on that education component and look at their perspective of a world they've existed in, either been an entrepreneur or investor, like I said, you start to open up your eyes. In turn, that education process and feeding that level of curiosity you're able to see what is, kind of this idea of like pattern recognition of being able to see early on what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, what fits that profile, and where you feel comfortable based on your risk tolerance as well, right? And this idea also of, listen, you're not an expert in this space, but can you talk to an expert? And the fact is, when you're an active athlete, I always talk about this, which is when I was an active athlete, I was never a superstar. I was a grinder for 8 years, right?
Yeah.
Even for myself, like, doors are open for you as an active athlete. Anyone's going to want to talk to you while you are still active. So being able to have access to all types of people that are experts in their space, if you want to go seek them out, there's amazing examples across men's sports, women's sports that are kind of transforming today, which is, the athlete is an easy mark. That's literally going to the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely, awesome. So we do have a question here from Hillary, and I think this is probably better for you, Isaiah. And she wants to know, what technology do you think is missing from the sports space? And she's got some examples here. I think you have highlighted some of these too, but whether it's training related, fan engagement, or maybe even safety, security, kind of ballpark operations kind of stuff. I'm curious what you think about those sectors, and maybe some other ones as well.
Well, I think innovation and kind of disruption can take place in a lot of different forms. I think in two sides that we look at, I'll kind of talk about two big markets that are ripe. And it sounded like Hillary's question is very much around human performance and kind of how to look at it. But where we look at sports as the ultimate test bed of, like, all right, it captures eyeballs. It's a captive audience. It's got a global audience. What can that look like, right? So just disruption and innovation is the test bed for not only elite athletes, but also kind of the experience and the personalization of that experience itself, a lot of different ways. I think we've just reached the tip of the iceberg on things like daily fantasy sports as it extends to skill-based gaming and sports betting. The innovation engine, particularly of this country, is starting to rear its head towards that. And you're starting to see just amazing ways to engage an audience in a kind of a hyper way that just had not existed before. Accelerated adoption in a lot of ways, especially over the last 9 months. It's a space we're watching very, very closely. It's fascinating in almost every single way. It's amazing how you're disrupting what started as daily fantasy sports and was somewhat stagnant to all types of dynamic aspects around that. That's one halo around that, but I could talk a lot about on the human performance side. There's tons of innovation that we're looking at that really is around automation and taking guesswork, how we all feel our best. It's like at a very high level. There's a lot of different spokes to the technology wheel that are actually going to enable that as well.
Yeah, I think those are two perfect things. Just from my perspective too, the number of new things coming out and new UIs and business models on the gaming side, and then just the number of people that are interested now in stats about themselves is off the charts. And Rudy here, we got a question from Adam. Do you think your investments with Andre have shifted the way athletes look at how they spend their money?
That's a great question. Do I think macro? No. I think social media still wins that, still that reward, any day of the week. But I definitely think it's opened the light to it as well too. So I think that it's had more athletes start thinking about it differently. And again, it's somewhat of a light to where it wasn't there before, and now it's part of the conversation at least.
Yeah. How far do you think for either of you? How far do you think we are in this shift towards athletes seeing themselves as owners of these businesses?
I think we're right there. I think it's part of the conversation. Yeah, I think we're right there. I think it's part of all the conversations that I have with them now. I think they're just trying to, just like Scott said before, just trying to figure out what it looks like. A-Rod's coming up next. I think he's a beacon for that conversation. He's actually doing it. So now there's examples of it happening. Whereas before, it's not just an idea, it's actually being done, and we see specific examples, and there's things to emulate now, whereas before there wasn't.
Just super high level, one comment, which is it's absolutely happening. I love what Rudy said. It's happening right now. And you start to think about this transformation and the empowerment of the athlete themselves, of not this old model of, we'll pay you some money, you sit to the side, be the face, and kind of a marketing campaign, which is, are we true partners? Are you going to actually help develop how we take this to market and take your input, because it's valuable as well. And there's just an amazing shift going on with that right now.
Jacob, any day I get to hang out with Isaiah Kacyvenski and Rudy Cline-Thomas and just listen to them go, it's a good day. So appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah, appreciate it.
We'll be chatting in the near future.